So today my message is going to be a little bit different. Today I want to talk to you out of what is just happening right now this week. And I'm in the middle of a lot of mixed emotions, and I feel this moment in a really visceral way. So I just want you to stay with me, because we were so looking forward to having our first live experience here at Mosaic in Hollywood, live worship with our band. MSC was going to lead us in worship. I was going to bring a message this Sunday night. This room was going to be filled with people we love and new friends we have not yet met. And we knew it was going to be an exciting, beautiful, extraordinary experience. And we've patiently waited for over a year and a half to be able to do this again. We've all faced a national crisis, a global crisis, of a pandemic, of a quarantine. And for those of us who live in cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, New York, the ramifications and consequences of this pandemic and quarantine have even been more severe than in so many other places across the country. And so we've been waiting. We've been good neighbors. We've been a part of the community. We've cared for our city. We've been really careful to be respectful and responsible as a community of faith. But we were finally going to get to open. And then on Thursday, we get a ping. I don't know about you, but my emotional response to pings have changed dramatically over the last year and a half. And suddenly we saw that the city of Los Angeles had determined to change the requirements to implement a mask mandate on Saturday night at midnight. And even though the CDC was not recommending that, and even though the state of California was not necessarily moving in that direction, our city was, and that had a direct effect on us. And we had intended for that July 18th celebration to film the worship experiences, to have 3 or 4 different sets of worship, to just absolutely make it an extraordinary experience, but to film our community coming together and singing and laughing and praying and celebrating together. And we knew we could not create the environment and the experience that we wanted to with the mandate. So I made the hard decision of canceling the event. And I've had to settle in that. And I've had all kinds of conversations and experiences. And in the midst of all of it, you ever feel like you just can't get a win? They just keep taking L's and you can't get that W. And I mean, frankly, if you're like me and you're a Clipper fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It seems like every single time that we have an opportunity to actually win it all, we just have something happen to us. And so even this year, I thought, this is the Clippers' year. I mean, the Lakers were eliminated, and it seemed like the Red Sea was parted so we could go through to the promised land, and Kawhi just hobbles off the court. And even though without him, there was a team that just rose up and did so well. And I got to tell you, I'm still like a huge Clipper fan, but we just keep taking the L's. You can't seem to get the W. And frankly, that's the way I felt this week. I mean, how many losses do we have to take to get a win? And how many challenges do we have to face that we have to overcome? And that's what I really want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about when you lose to win. Because I want to take a few minutes as your pastor and as the spiritual voice and leader of this community we know of as Mosaic, to explain to you why I've made the choices I've made and why we're taking this particular path and doing it this way. Because a lot of people said to me, why haven't you opened up? Why aren't you standing up against the government? Why aren't you just going ahead and having public worship? And why are you being so cooperative with what the CDC is saying, with what the state government says, what the city officials say? And I just want you to, for a moment, come with me to the inside of my soul and understand the compass that guides me. I want you to go with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. We're going to begin reading in verse 19, and we're going to read through verse 23. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means, I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. I don't know if there's ever been a time in my life where this passage has been more relevant and informative. Now, anyone who knows me knows that this declaration from Paul, that I become all things for all people, that I may somehow save some, has been a life declaration for me. And this informs everything I do as an individual and everything I do as a leader and everything I do as the pastor of Mosaic. Everything I call us to do together as a community is informed by this declaration, but it's in a context of so many tensions. And in fact, if you read it too quickly, you'll miss the struggle that Paul's actually experiencing himself. In verse 19, he opens up by saying, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone. And so right away, in that first verse, he gives us a contrast. He says, I am free. And that is where I begin in my own life. And I want you to realize that this is where everyone who's a follower of Christ begins. You're free. And no matter what else is going on, no matter what other factors are involved, you actually have this wonderful reality that you are free. And Paul says, look, I make a lot of decisions about my life. I make a lot of decisions about the way I live my life. There are choices that have to be made. And if you look at some of my choices, you might not understand this, but I am free. And every single day of my life, I remind myself that I live in this incredible gift called freedom. And it's not just the freedom of living in a particular nation or living in a particular time in history. It is the freedom that you experience when you are in a relationship with Jesus. That you're not handcuffed to the opinions of others unless you choose to be. That you don't have to live your life manipulated by what other people say or think or do. That you actually are now fully and beautifully free. And I love how Paul says, though I am free and belong to no one, he's saying, look, every decision I make is not made out of coercion or manipulation or fear or any coercion. He said, I want you to understand that to understand me, you have to understand that I am free. And that for me has been one of the powerful reminders over the last 18 months. That no matter what was going on in the world around me, whatever we're facing with a pandemic and what we face with the quarantine, what we face with the battles for social justice, for racial equality, one of the powerful things that has been constant a reminder to me is that in every circumstance, I have the freedom to choose what matches my conscience. And I think one of the challenging things in our culture is that so oftentimes we abdicate our freedom for acceptance. We abdicate our freedom for comfort. We abdicate our freedom for lack of conflict. And sometimes it can look like we're conforming, or maybe it's actually more than just an appearance, but a reality. Conforming to the expectations of others around us. But I want you to know, to live the life that God created you to live and to understand how we are moving together as a people, you have to understand we begin here. I am free. And the powerful thing about being free is that you are actually free to make the best choice. See, I think what's funny is a lot of times when we think of freedom, it's the freedom to make your worst choice, right? And that's what we do when we're kids. We break away from our parents, or we break away from social structures, we break away from whatever authority systems in our life because we want to be free to make our own choices. And most of the time, we're not fighting to make a choice that is actually more noble. We're not going to our parents and saying, I don't care what you say. I'm going to live a life of integrity. I don't care what you say. I'm just going to be a person of truth. I don't care what you say. I'm going to live a life of morality and integrity and purity and nobility. We're not usually fighting for the right to be free to be more. We're usually using our freedom to be less. When Paul says, I am free, he's not saying I'm free to be less. He's actually saying I'm free to be more. What would happen if we actually saw our freedom as the freedom to be more? Our freedom to violate expectations, our freedom to violate the status quo, our freedom to elevate above mediocrity, our freedom to not do what is expected, but to go beyond expectation. And that applies in so many different areas in our lives. It can actually be indicative of how we use our money. Just as an example, when people are early on in their faith journey and are trying to figure out how this relationship with Jesus works out and their relationship with the church. So oftentimes what's interesting is that it always comes back to, well, wait a minute. Am I obligated to give? Am I obligated to tithe? Is this something I have to do? And you see, as long as you're asking the question, is this something I have to do? You're not free yet. See, what happens when you're free is that you actually become a person who is hilariously generous, a person who just loves to give. See, freedom doesn't give you the freedom to give, let's say, less than 10% as a tithe. Freedom actually allows you to become generous, to go far beyond 10. And what I think so oftentimes happens is that we think freedom is our right to be less. And so we have those basic 10 commandments. Freedom is not, oh, now I can kill people. See, no, you're free to love your enemies. Oh, now I'm free so I can steal someone else's goat or donkey or sheep. No, now you have the freedom to actually give rather than to take. Oh, I'm free. So now I don't have to worry about telling the truth. No, you're free. So now you can be free to tell the truth regardless of outcome or consequence. It's odd to me how freedom seems to be most often our pathway to less. But when Paul says, though I am free, he's actually saying, you might confuse my actions as someone who's not free because my freedom elevates me. It doesn't make me less, it makes me more. So then he says, I have made myself a slave to everyone. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone. Now, when I read that passage, I thought, oh, that word slave is not a good word to use right now. Or maybe it was never a great word to use, except it's a real word. Because you see, Paul lived in a time of economic slavery and political slavery and the slavery of conquest and the slavery of oppression. And as a Jew, he understood the reality of slavery, where an entire nation was under the captivity and oppression of the Roman Empire. And Paul understood both sides of this issue because Paul was both a Jew and a Roman citizen. And so he understood the freedom of a Roman citizen. He understood the slavery of a Jewish citizen. He says, but I have this tension, what seems to be this dialectic, this contrast where I'm free, but I've made myself a slave to everyone. He says, I am free, but I am bound. And he uses that language because it is strong, visceral language. He's saying, I have bound myself to others. I have chosen to make others more important than myself. And frankly, people who do not understand why freedom is actually a gift and what you're supposed to do with that freedom will look at you if you do less with your freedom and think that you're a slave by obligation. He says to us, no, you don't understand. My freedom has allowed me to make a choice to make myself a slave to everyone. Not a victim to everyone. Not a person who lives to please everyone or to get everyone's acceptance or to somehow become a celebrity or to win in popularity. He's saying, no, I have an intention. I've made myself a slave to everyone with an intention to win as many as possible. So even though I am free, I am also bound. I am free. I am bound. And that's the tension in which I've chosen to live my own life. And that's the tension in which Jesus lived his life. He chose, as one who was completely free, to be completely bound. He chose to make himself a sacrifice on our behalf. Even though no one was more powerful than him, he made himself powerless. And he did that so that he might actually win us to himself. And Paul is saying, I have bound myself so that I might win as many as possible. And so he's not a slave to everyone because he's a victim or because he's powerless or because he's less, because he's inferior. He's actually made himself a slave to everyone because he has the strength in his freedom to live his life for others. This is a simple equation that we use here, even at Mosaic. We know we're free. And the reality is that the world around us can change very quickly, and the political scenarios of any nation can change in a moment. But no one can steal from you your deepest freedom, because they cannot force you to become what you do not choose to become. And no one can force you to make a choice that violates your conscience. You and I will always have the power to choose who we are and how we live our lives. And one of the decisions we've made, even as a community, is that we make choices knowing we are free and we are bound to win as many as possible. Let me just apply this in a very, very specific way. There are churches all over the country. And by the way, I've begun traveling just a bit, and it doesn't even seem like when I travel across the United States, I'm in the same country. I flew to Chicago, and there was 30, 40,000 people out on the streets with a Cubs game, and there were no masks. In fact, there were signs in the restaurants that said our employees do not wear masks. And people are enjoying the game, enjoying food, walking the streets. It was as if the world was normal. I went to Miami, same thing. The city was wide open. Went to New York, everything was shut down, and it looked like it was a ghost town. And so I realized that different people across the nation are experiencing different things. And as I talk to different leaders in different churches, the contrast is so extreme. I mean, some have told me we've been open the entire time. We've never experienced a shutdown or the quarantine, or it lasted for us a few weeks and then we were open again. And it's hard to have a conversation with someone who is living in that world because I don't know that world anymore. I'm right here in Los Angeles, and so I've experienced with so many of you the heightened extreme of our shutdown. And it seems like it just keeps perpetuating and moving along and going forward, and it never seems to come to an end. Even when I thought it was coming to an end, it didn't come to an end. And even when everyone seemed to think it was coming to an end, it didn't come to an end. And so I've had other pastors, and I get DMs and comments and people saying, wait a minute, why aren't you opening up? Wait a minute, why aren't you guys going against the government? Why aren't you taking a stand? In fact, in the middle of this political season in California, I've had people say, come on, we need to rise up as the church and take a stand against the government. And one of the things that really strikes me is that even though I understand their sentiment, I actually have a different end game. Because my end game, as crazy as it sounds, isn't actually religious freedom. My end game is to win as many as possible. See, I want religious freedom. I hope against hope that so many of the things that seem to even be focused on the church itself in a negative way are just perceptions and not realities. But I want you to understand something, that I want to make sure that we're in the right battle, because why get a win if the win actually isn't the win you're supposed to get? It's so important to make sure that we're in the right game and that we're winning the battle that actually matters. Paul says, look, I want to make sure you understand what I'm trying to win. I'm not trying to win my personal rights. I'm not trying to win my right to live a certain way or to speak a certain way or to be a certain way. He said, I'm actually trying to win as many as possible. And so I want you to know that as I've been processing decisions, I haven't processed those decisions based on what I want or even what I feel like I need. I haven't processed those decisions based on what I think should even be allowed for the church, or I haven't been processing these decisions based on my view of government or the relationship to the crisis with the pandemic. I've been processing all these decisions based on how do we posture ourselves in such a way that people without Jesus would see the love of Jesus in us and through us. Because our outcome game here, our W, is winning as many as possible. I think of the Warriors' 73 win season, where they won more regular season games than any other team in history, only to lose the finals. You can feel like you're winning and then actually lose the game that matters. And for us, especially here in Los Angeles, and especially in a city that already has a very suspicious posture toward faith, toward Christianity, toward Jesus, toward the church, it's so critical for us to make sure that we win the right battle and that we understand that our battle is always for people, not against people. And Paul goes into a more specific dynamic of what this looks like. In verse 20, he says, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. Now, everything Paul just said, he makes a statement that almost like creates a little subset to make sure you understand he knows the difference too. Let's go back up. Look at verse 20. He says, okay, wait a minute. To the Jews, I become like a Jew. When I read that, I pause for a minute and go, wait a minute, Paul, you're not like a Jew. You are a Jew. So why do you say to the Jews, I become a Jew or like a Jew to win the Jews? Because Paul, you are a Jew. But here's the difference, you see. One, Paul was never quite Jewish enough because he was also a Roman citizen. And he was never quite Roman enough because he was also ethnically Jewish. And he was also Hebrew. And he was a devout believer in Judaism. And so Paul was in two different worlds, and he's never quite fully in the other world because he was also a part of the other world. But here's the funny thing. Paul says, look, to the Jews, I become like a Jew. You know why he says that? Because Paul was never limited by the mindset of only being a Jew, because now he's in Jesus, so he's free. So he's not limited by one particular expression of being human. He can now actually transcend beyond that. So he says, no, but wait a minute. When I'm relating to those who are Jewish, I become like a Jew because I want to win the Jews. I want to find those areas where I resonate and they resonate with me. I want to make sure there's a connection, a human connection between me and the Jews. And then he says, to those who are under the law, because those are the Jews, I became like one under the law. And then he adds this little parenthetical thought. Though I myself am not under the law. He wants you to understand, wait a minute. I'm not under the law psychologically. I'm not under the law spiritually. I'm free from the law. He goes, but I'm living under the law because those who are living under the law would not listen to me when I talk to them about who Jesus is and what God has done for them if they saw me violating that which was important to them. He says, I do this so as to win those under the law. See, Paul was actually working for the win. And he was willing to take losses to make sure he got the win that mattered. And then he flips it. He says, to those not having the law, that's the Romans, I became like one not having the law. Now, he didn't just become like one not having the law because he was also a Roman citizen. But what he's saying is, look, even though I'm now living and relating like this Roman, I'm not the same as them because I'm living in that space, but I'm outside of that space. I'm bigger than that. I'm free of that. I don't have to act the way a Roman always acts. I don't have to act the way a Jew always acts. I can always make my decisions from a higher consciousness. And so even though I am not free from the law. He adds this parenthetical thought so they would understand that. But I'm under God's law, but I'm under Christ's law. He says, I do this. I act like one not having the law so as to win those not having the law. And so Paul actually begins to become incredibly adaptive. It's not that he doesn't know himself. He knows himself so clearly that he can become exactly what is needed in every environment he's in. Has that ever applied anywhere like it does right now? I mean, here we are in Los Angeles, and what to me it strikes me so poignantly is that we're living in the tension of a world of extremes. You're either a conservative or a liberal or a white supremacist or a socialist. You're a Republican or a Democrat. It just seems like everyone has to choose a polarizing side. And if you don't choose one, you're thrown into the other category. You're either with us or against us. And what really strikes me is that the wisdom of Paul has been lost in our time. And people want me all the time to pick a side. We had a development company a few years ago come and to see if they could help us raise money and as a church. And they came and said, oh, Mosaic is the most untapped brand we've ever seen. You guys have never raised money, really asked people for money, and you have such a strong and powerful and respected brand. This is going to be easy. They came back later and said it was impossible for us. And I asked them why, and they said, you're not liberal enough for the liberals who give, and you're not conservative enough for the conservatives who give. And so because you stand in both worlds, neither world wants to invest in what's happening here. And I thought this is so ironic because I think it sounds like Jesus. See, people want us to choose a side, but let me tell you, Jesus died for people on the far right, and he died for people on the far left. Jesus died for Republicans and Democrats. Jesus died for socialists and even for racists. Jesus died for everyone so that everyone would become who God created them to be. And one of the great challenges is that so oftentimes the church has chosen in our national history to trust more in politics than in the gospel. And one of the things that frustrates me so much is that the message of Jesus gets lost in all the cultural conflicts and political posturing. And I want you to realize that what we're doing is not accidental, it's intentional. We will never sacrifice the win that matters for all the small wins that pull at us all, that everyone wants us to get into and then lose people. We are here with one singular intention: to be proof of God to a world that desperately needs him. To be proof that Jesus stepped into human history 2,000 years ago, died on the cross on our behalf, rose from the dead, and that he is here in this moment, present everywhere, longing for every single human being to discover the forgiveness that he brings through his death on the cross and the life that he brings through his resurrection. And Paul says, I become like one under the law for those under the law, and I become like one without the law for those who do not have the law. And Paul says, and I understand the nuances of this. He goes, I get this, but I want you to understand that when you are free in Jesus and you're bound in him, it creates in you a higher consciousness. It creates in you a new way of seeing how to live this life. And I want to read verse 22, and it's one of the hardest verses for me to read. It says, to the weak I become weak to win the weak. I never really think of myself as a weak person. In fact, I would say that I probably carry a bit of my identity in being strong, being able to overcome sickness, be able to overcome injuries, to be able to to defy aging. I really have a high value for strength. And one of the great challenges, even in this week, was when I decided to cancel our gathering. Someone I care about deeply, someone I respect, looked at me and says, people are going to see you as weak. And when they said that, those words just seeped into me and they cut so deep because I don't want to be perceived as weak. And you ever push back and respond to something, but it already got into you? So I pushed back and I said, no one sees me as weak, but there's other little voice going, you see, you're just going to be seen as weak. And then this passage just came flooding into my soul. That when you're going for the win, when you choose to lose to win, you have to just come to that place where I am free and I am bound, but I'm also egoless. Now, I found in my own life that the worst decisions I make are fueled by my ego. The worst decisions I make are fueled by what I think other people are going to say about me or think about me or feel about me. The most powerful decisions to make, the wisest decisions I ever make as a person, is when I actually let go of my ego and don't even allow to be factored in how others may think about my choice, but what is the choice that creates the most good. When Paul says, to the weak, I become weak to win the weak. Paul's actually saying, not that he is weak. In fact, you can't even do this if you're weak. Because if you're weak, you don't become weak to win the weak. You're just weak. You actually have to have a strength of character, a strength of resolve, a strength that is a moral compass that presses more powerfully within you than everything around you. No circumstance can shape who you are. And Paul says, no, you need to understand. You think I'm weak. Because I think what's happening is that Jewish Christians were looking at Paul and those who are not yet followers of Christ out of Judaism were looking at Paul saying, look, you're so weak. You've conformed to the Romans. And the Romans were looking at Paul and saying, look, you're so weak. You're conforming to the Jews. And I think everyone was looking at Paul saying, you are so weak because you keep adapting and changing and caring about how these people think about your actions. And Paul's saying, no, you don't understand. To the weak, I become weak. Paul understands that their limited view of reality, their limited understanding of God, their limited understanding of what it means to be human was actually a weakness on their part. And he could argue them all day long, but he wasn't trying to win the argument. He was trying to win the person. I think one of the most difficult things in life is to lose the battle so that you can win the war. I think one of the most challenging things in life is to lose an argument so that you can win the person. And Paul says, to the weak, I became weak to win the weak. So just straight up, that I think that what happened this week should have happened? No. Was I mad when I saw that there was a mask mandate that was implemented for Saturday night at midnight? Absolutely. And frankly, I did some follow-up and it was Thursday. I thought to myself, wait a minute, if this was really a health crisis, why wasn't the mandate implemented tonight, Thursday night at midnight? Or why wasn't it implemented on Friday night at midnight? And I have to tell you that my instincts tell me that it was on Saturday night at midnight because churches meet on Sunday. And it made me angry. And then I called some people and interacted with some people, and I discovered, even through people in Sacramento, that there is a posture of wanting to catch churches to give them a reason to be able to shut us down. Now, I've never talked about this, and I've never said this publicly. I've never tried to make this an us and them issue, but I want you to realize that we are in the middle of political tensions and a spiritual warfare. And so I want you to know that I see this and I feel it and I sense it, but I'm not going to try to go to war against the wrong battle. And so the reason we went ahead and closed down is because we want to be here for people who do not yet know Jesus. See, what I do know is that those of us who follow Jesus, nothing but nothing can stop us from moving forward. When the pandemic was in the middle of its peak, and yet there were some sporting events, but there were no audiences in the stands. And we were watching, especially the NBA, and you're watching the players play in the bubble, and there's no one watching them. It kind of felt sad. And because there was nobody there cheering them on, and no one there booing them, and no one there yelling at the referees and telling them that they made bad calls. And you can even have a sense that different players were affected by it in different ways. And a lot of people use that as the parallel for the church, that the church was not allowed to come together in the same way that people could not come together for sporting events. But here's the difference. You see, the church is not the people in the stands. The church is not the audience. The church are the players. See, we are the team on the court playing the game. We're not the audience watching the game. And frankly, if you think the church has been canceled for the last year and a half, it may be that you've been in the audience when you were supposed to be on the court. It may be that you were in the audience and you were supposed to be in the game. Because I want you to know something. When people say to me, when's the church going to reopen? I realize those people actually have a very limited understanding of the church. They are the audience. But we've never shut our doors. We've never stopped being the church. Because we were not the audience. We are the team on the court, in the game, thriving in the bubble. And what Paul is actually telling us is, don't underestimate me. See, I may look weak, but I've chose to become weak to win the week. And I want to challenge all of us who are followers of Jesus. I want to challenge the church across the nation to choose a posture of humility, not to try to become politically stronger, but spiritually stronger. That we realize that even with those who would oppose us, let me just have a moment of paranoia. Let me just for a moment suppose that the shutdown happened at midnight on Saturday night because there really is an intention of let's do what we can to close the church. And I can tell you on multiple times, I actually had people contact me letting me know, hey, there are magazines looking for churches that they can actually highlight as being against science and being the epicenters of spreading COVID. And even this week, got feedback, hey, it just needs you to know, there are people who are strategically trying to set up the church so that the church looks like it's the cause for the spread of COVID and how we're against responsible health choices and not listening to the CDC and against science. And I want you to listen to me for a moment because I don't talk like this often. These things are not incidental, but they are not our principal battle. Because everyone who's against the church are the very people we are for. See, even if there are people who are saying we need to find a way to just end the influence of Christianity, don't be surprised that there are so many documentaries coming out against churches and so many different series coming out against churches. Look, there are pastors who have been faithful to their wives all their lives. There will be no Vanity Fair article about them. There are pastors who have sacrificed their lives. Their husbands and wives have lived sacrificial lives, and their kids have suffered the consequence of decisions to serve others. But there's not going to be a documentary about those people. See, there are people who follow Jesus who have been sincere and have served others and have been sacrificial and are admirable, but you're just not going to see a lot of documentary series or feature films about them because there's just not a story in the good that people seem to be interested in. And so don't be confused when all the stories seem to be skewed in a certain direction. But I just want to be clear. that even if all that was true, even if the entire government and if every state decided we've got to find a way to make it harder for the church to exist, they will never be our enemies. They are going to be our objects of love. And listen to me, no matter how against you will ever be against the church will not be against you. If you're against Jesus, Jesus will never be against you. And I want you to know that the win for us is you. Even if you never agree with us or believe with us, we want you to have this unexplainable realization that you just couldn't get us to feel about you the way you feel about us. We loved you to the very end. Paul says this, I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing. This declaration from Paul has always been central to my life. I become all things to all men, that I might possibly save some. To all women, to all people, to everyone. It's one of the reasons why it's so hard for people to understand Mosaic, which I think is kind of funny. It's hard for churches to understand Mosaic. It's hard for Christian leaders to understand Mosaic, because most of us are defined by what we're against, not what we're for. And so people expect us to be against people. And in fact, so many of the conversations on social media are trying to get us to be against someone, or to be against something, or to take a position against another position. And the reason I don't do that is because, you see, I'm not against you. We are for you. And when Paul says, look, this is my strategy for life. I am all things. Wow, that is power. And we're living in a time where there's so much segmentation. It's white against black. It's Asian against Latino. It's like there's all of this disdain and hatred. It's the rich against the poor and the poor against the rich. It's the right against the left. Right now, the most important questions you get are, which side are you on? Who are you? And our identities have become more and more defined by what makes us different than everyone else, whether you're gay or you're straight, or whether you're a capitalist or a socialist, and if you're not careful, you're going to end up choosing your identity to let everyone know who you're against rather than who you're for. And if you want to know what Mosaic's position is, what my position is, here it is. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. And do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. I had a call this past week from a friend, and he's really brilliant. He's an Ivy League graduate. He has an MBA. He is a co-founder of a company that they sold for over $1 billion. In every measurable measurement, he's super successful, incredibly intelligent, incredibly talented. And he calls me up and he says, hey, I got a question for you. And it caught me off guard, but I didn't realize it was like a God question, a theological question. He said, I was just talking to someone, he was talking about evil, and then he talked about hell, and he goes, do you believe like in evil and in hell? And he goes, because I realized I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, I believe in heaven, I believe in the good stuff. And then I don't believe in all the negative stuff. I don't believe in evil, I don't believe in hell. And he goes, I know I'm sort of picking and choosing, but what do you think about all that? And it's a lot to unwrap on a phone call. And one of the things I said, well, one of the differences is that you kind of begin with what seems to be true, and then you might go to the Bible. And I kind of begin with the Bible, and then I work through how I perceive things to be true. And so it's like journeys toward truth that maybe start at a different place. It could end in the same place. And he goes, well, the reason I'm calling you is because when you talk about these things, it makes more sense to me. So I thought maybe you could help me make sense of this. And so we talked about evil for a while, and we talked about hell for a while. And then I said this. I said, all right, we're talking about something that happens after life, hell. And really what we need to be talking about right now is what we can do before life. Because there are people in the world right now who are suffering. There are people in the world who are trapped in poverty. There are people in the world who are homeless. There are people in the world who are drowning in desperation and depression. And there are people in the world who are lonely and alone, and they have no meaning in their life and have no purpose. And I said, so why don't we try to do the most good we can in this life, so that we can translate the experience of heaven on earth right now. Because then we can know that in this life, we've done the most good. And I think it'll have an effect on the afterlife as well. And he just paused and he said, yeah, it's a really good idea. And we'll talk more. But I think sometimes we get more fixated on the abstract concepts of evil and good and heaven and hell, rather than the concrete application of, am I trying to win people, to win them to the best life possible for them, to win them to love, to win them to hope, to win them to faith, to win them to life? Because I don't know about you, but I just come across so many people who are barely making it. I can look in their eyes and I just see so much depression and despair, and I see loneliness and disconnection, and it just seems as if there's a tidal wave across our nation of hopelessness and despair. Yes, we've had 600,000 people die of COVID in the United States. But we've had almost 850,000 people die from drug overdose in about that same period of time. I wonder if in the middle of a pandemic and in a fear of dying from a virus, we have lost sight of the fact that human beings were not created to live in isolation. We're not created to do life alone. We're definitely not designed to live in insulated bubbles with 6 feet of separation, with masks that cover our faces. And I know that a health crisis can create a deep sense of concern and fear, and a need for social responsibility as we make choices going forward. But I think in the end, we're not paying attention to the deepest need in the human spirit. There was a season when, of course, I had sense that we're making decisions with the best science we have and trying to protect people from catastrophic health issues. But I think there has been a shift where we're making decisions not based on science, but based on fear. And it doesn't mean that science doesn't inform us, but that it's actually fear that is forming us. And this is the fine line that I've chosen to walk. And I pray that we as Mosaic can walk faithfully with wisdom. I don't want us to do anything to make a statement. I want us to do things to create a posture of humility, of compassion. I want us to always choose the posture that says to those who do not believe, you matter more to us than even our own freedom. You matter to us more than what we long for ourselves. I cannot wait for the day where we fill this room and we sing and we laugh and we worship and we pray. And I cannot wait to see your face. Cannot wait to hug you without hesitation. And I'm convinced that that's what all of us need. We need human community in the context of the life that Jesus brings. But I want you to understand, that's why I want to take a moment and bring this message today, that we're making the choices not out of fear, we're making the choices out of love. We're not making our choices because we're even concerned with the implications of all the legal ramifications. We're making our choices because we care about the people that we serve. And we want the message of Jesus to be heard without obstacle or barrier. So I invite you to join me. By the way, the church is in the game. We're not in the stands. We've never stopped. We've never stopped serving. We've never stopped loving. We've never stopped giving. We've never stopped winning people with love. And that is one thing I know for certain will remain true in the future. Nothing but nothing can stop the love of Jesus from reaching hearts that are desperate to find that love. And maybe even right now, you've been listening to this message and you've been in the middle of an inside conversation with Mosaic. But I want you to know that the reason we're here is for you. If you happen to be listening right now and you have not stepped into a relationship with Jesus, you've never crossed the line of faith, I want you to know you are why we do what we do. And you are why we are willing to sacrifice to do this in a way where the message of Jesus resonates with you. We want to be proof that God is here for you. And maybe you're listening right now and you know that what you need is Jesus in your life, and that you need his forgiveness, that you need his freedom, you need his love in your life. I just want to encourage you right now. Just take a moment right now, wherever you are, and just open up your life to Jesus and pray this simple prayer: Jesus, I give you my life. There's no magic in that. It's just a declaration of relationship. When you turn to God and you say, Jesus, I give you my life, it gives Jesus that permission he waits for to come into your life and to bring you into intimate relationship with him. You see, God is a gentleman and he will never force himself on you. As much as he knows you need him, as much as he knows you're exactly in that place where he could change everything for you, as much as God knows that he is exactly what you need, he will not force himself on you. But that moment you open up your life to him and say, Jesus, I give my life to you. He receives that invitation, comes into your life. He forgives you of your sin, and he moves you into freedom. Let me encourage you to do it right now, and then to let us know that you've made that commitment so that someone in our community here can reach out to you and help you in your journey of faith. We love you guys. We'll see you next week.